Nicola, this is the Global Digest think tank group, and you are our guest today. Where are you right now exactly, and what's your background? Why don't you let us know, please?
I'm in Serbia, that's where I live, and I do cover the Balkans, although to be honest with you, I avoid covering this region because I find it too depressive. I mainly focus on the post-Soviet space, on Russia, and on Moscow's relations with its neighbors, with the countries such as Ukraine, Belarus, Central Asian states, and the South Caucasus, former Soviet republics. In general, I focus mainly on Russia's foreign policy and, as I said, its relations with the former Soviet states, but also on Moscow's policy regarding the Balkans, its influence in the Middle East, and also in some other parts of the world.
I see.
Unique Yugoslavia actually was a special case because it was not part of the Western world, it was not part of the Soviet Empire or the former Eastern blocs. So it was between those two blocs. And even nowadays, Serbia is formally not a part of the West, although it does follow policies that Brussels and Washington are pursuing. It's not Russia's ally, despite media interpretations about Serbia being a close Russia's ally. That's not true. Militarily, Serbia is a neutral country, although it's it unilaterally declared uh, neutrality in 2007, I believe. And to this day, not a single country in the world has recognized this. So the West sees Serbia as an instrument that it can use to achieve its own geopolitical goals. We know that Serbia is supplying Ukraine with weapons. It's also supplying Israel with weapons. On the other hand, the Serbian government tries to pursue a pro-Russian policy, although I think it's just an illusion. It's tried to create an illusion among its own voters that it's pro-Russian, while in reality it's following policies um, basically the same as those that we see in the West, in the European Union and in the United States. So the country is not neutral. It is de facto part of the EU and NATO structure. Formally, it's not. So that's the major difference between Serbia and other neighboring countries. They are officially part of either NATO or the EU or both, and unlike them, Serbia pretends to be neutral, but in reality, it's not. Yugoslavia was at the time, but Serbia is a totally different story.
I see. I see. So Serbia, current Serbia and Balkan region is kind of pulling from Western and Soviet, right? You are in the middle. So
Well, yeah, that was the case after the Second World War, when Stalin and Roosevelt and Churchill signed the Yalta agreements and they divided spheres of influence. Yugoslavia was like 50-50, so 50% Soviet influence, 50% Western influence. It's entirely possible that in the meantime they made a new agreement that we were not aware of. So now I would say that Serbia is 90% Western influence. And Russia does have some influence here in the Balkans. It's mainly in the sphere of energy, but politically and militarily, it virtually does not exist. It exists only in minds of those people that want to believe that Russia is a strong country, or in minds of the propagandists who aim to portray Russia as a great threat to the West, which I don't think it is, because in Ukraine it demonstrated that it's extremely weak. So I cannot imagine Russia as a threat to anyone, except to those nations and groups that rely on Russia as and see Russia as an ally and hoping that Russia will protect them. usually they get very disappointed because Russia has a very bad habit of betraying its allies and partners. Um, so Serbia is in the Western sphere of influence, 100%. Now, that does not mean that other actors don't have their portion of influence here. They do, even China does, especially in the sphere of economy. Turkey is also trying to establish some influence, but in general, this is a Western geopolitical orbit, and the European Union, in my view, pulls the strings here,
I
which
see.
makes sense given geographic proximity and the fact that the country is surrounded by EU members and economically it's heavily dependent on the European Union.
I see. So, Serbian, you said Serbian support Ukraine, and also, I don't know, it's same with other Balkan countries, Croatia or Bosnia or those countries are same policy, or it may be slightly different. I don't know, but Serbia
Well,
support Ukraine, right?
yeah, essentially, yes, it is the same. Although, unlike Serbia, they don't pretend to pursue a neutral foreign policy and the so-called independent foreign policy, which I don't think is possible under the current circumstances. So they openly, other countries openly sided with NATO and the European Union, and most of them are members of either NATO or the EU or both. Unlike them, Serbia, especially the current Serbian government and president, they have a big problem because their voters have a very strong pro-Russian sentiment. So it's very difficult for them to pursue an anti-Western policy because the country, as I said, is surrounded by the EU and NATO. But on the other hand, they are fully aware that their voters have a strong pro-Russian sentiment, so they have to balance. They need to create an illusion at home that the country is neutral and that it aims to maintain good relations with Moscow, while on the other hand, it continues supplying weapons to Ukraine and votes against Russia everywhere on the international scene and the global arena. In reality, the country is on the Western side, but at home, it's the government simply has to create an illusion that it's pursuing a neutral foreign policy because that's what their voters want to hear. So that's how modern democracy works. You simply have to tell lies and fairy tales to your own voters, to tell them what they want to hear, while in reality you do something completely different.
Right, right. So, I mean, current atmosphere, Serbia or Balkan region, probably you have to listen more about Brussels and Washington compared to Moscow, right? So that is a reality. But before it was broken under Yugoslavia, like Kosovo, Kosovo bombing, or I mean, the war. It's more played by Russia, Soviet influence at the time, or it's more about Washington, the West role.
Well, it was 50-50 according to the agreement reached in Yalta at the end of the Second World War. So that agreement allowed Yugoslavia to balance between the East and the West, but at the time, the East still represented a significant political and military force, which is not the case nowadays. Now Russia, as I said, is extremely weak and is not in a position to impose its will on its former client states, let alone here in the Balkans, in Serbia, which is surrounded by Western nations and nations that are allied with the West. The situation now is totally different. You mentioned Yugoslavia and how things were back then. I think at the time Tito was allowed to pursue, um, well, I would call it a multi-vector foreign policy, which now some Central Asian leaders are trying to implement.
I
Even
mean,
Belarusian President Alexander.
Tito was part of non-aligned movement, right? And it
Exactly, yes. At the time, yes, exactly, yes. And now some other leaders are trying to do the same with more or less success, but he was very successful at the time. But I think he just used the situation. There was a very strong division at the time between the East and West, and Yugoslavia was stuck in between. And it managed to benefit. For instance, during the Iraq-Iran war, Yugoslavia was supplying weapons to both Baghdad and Tehran, and was really benefiting from that war, and in many other situations as well. But even then, I don't think it was completely neutral. I think it was a Western attempt to just to isolate this region, not to allow the Soviet Union to get here, to spread its influence here, if I may say. And it was a very successful operation because Yugoslavia was not part of the Eastern Bloc. It was closer culturally and economically. It was closer to the West. But again, within the country, there were also divisions. Slovenia and Croatia, they were always closer to the West, unlike Serbia and Montenegro. They always had that strong pro-Russian sentiment in their societies, even nowadays. But as I said, the government here in Belgrade is pursuing a very exotic policy, in my view.
you see
So things are not nearly the same as they were 40, 50 years ago.
during Yugoslavia, there was external power, Soviet and the West, but you said Soviets are weakening. Tito was neutral person, and he was the leading one of non-aligned movement, and especially from Europe. And mainly, probably Yugoslavia broken more about internal issue, isn't it right? Because you have big religious conflict between Christian and Muslim.
Yes, although foreign powers also played significant role in the breakup of Yugoslavia, but it's a very complex issue. I think the country it was established in 1918 as a result of the First World War. Um, Even then, it was quite clear that the Slovenians and Croats did not want to live in the same country with the Serbs, or even if they did not want to be dominated by the Serbian elite, and they were always looking for ways um, to have more autonomy and to separate from Yugoslavia, which they did. The Croats did in 1941 when Germany invaded Yugoslavia and helped Croatia established a puppet state. But nevertheless, I think the country was always rotten from the inside. Its foundation was, from the Serbian perspective, it was a mistake. That's how it's widely portrayed here. Although I don't know if we can label it as a mistake, because there was no other option at the time. A lot of people living in Serbia and also in other parts of then Yugoslavia, they wanted to live in a joint state, to be part of a larger pan-Slavic group, because it was quite popular at the time. From this perspective, it proved to be a mistake, but as I said, I'm not sure if there was an alternative at the time. And you're talking about the breakup of Yugoslavia in the early 1990s. Yes, there was a lot of internal divisions, but as I said, I think foreign powers played an important role in that process, because they backed Slovenia's and Croatia's separatism, which, in my view, triggered the breakup of the country. And from this perspective, maybe it was possible to preserve Yugoslavia in some form as a confederation, although it's rather debatable whether it would have been functional as a state. Who knows? We'll never find out. Now, technically, yes, it was a religious wars, especially in Bosnia, because the only thing that separates those three groups living in Bosnia is religion, right? Everything else is basically the same. Their culture is the same. They speak all the same language essentially. So yeah, religion played an important role during the war, and even then, foreign powers openly involved, including Iran, which is very interesting because Iran now wants to hide its involvement in the Bosnian War when it funded Bosnian Muslims and helped them together with the United States. At the time, Iran and Washington were partners in the Balkans against the Serbs. And now it's very unpleasant for the Iranian leadership to talk about that because now they're bitter enemies. But at the time, they were allies here in the Balkans. In Croatia, well, nominally it wasn't a religious war. From the Croat perspective, the Serbs wanted to separate to create their own country on the Croatian territory, which triggered a war. From the Serbian perspective, it is Croatian declaration of independence that triggered the war. And in any case, what happened was a tragedy for all the people living in Yugoslavia because the country no longer exists. For some nations, maybe it's better this way. Maybe for Slovenia, because their standard of living definitely improved following the breakup of Yugoslavia, and now they're a full-fledged member of the European Union. So I guess they benefited from the breakup. Other nations, I'm not sure. In Croatia, the feelings are mixed about the country, but in all other former Yugoslav republics, I think people regret that all that happened. Now, that does not mean that they would like to live in a country like that again, that they would like to have a union or whatever with the Croats or with Muslims in Bosnia, or I don't think they would like to live in the same country with the Serbs. So there's a lot of bad blood between those groups, and that's the result of all that tragic war in the 1990s.
I see.
We all preserved a lot of our pre-Christian religions, our pagan Slavic roots. We all preserved that, especially the Serbs, and incorporated it into Orthodox Christianity. But I would say for an average person living in this region, religion does not play a significant role in their everyday life. But nevertheless, religion was used as an instrument in the 1990s, and we could say that it was a form of religious war back then. In Kosovo, no, because Albanians are totally different ethnic groups. They're not Slavs. And that war was not religious, regardless of the fact that they are also nominally Muslims. In reality, they're very secular. And there are reports that many Albanians are converting into Catholic religion. So it's rather debatable if they're still Muslims. They are nominally, but in reality, not really. But that war was not religious. It was a pure separatism, again, backed by Western countries. And as a result, Kosovo unilaterally declared independence in 2008. It was recognized by most of the European Union members, not all, but the majority, and many Western countries in general. But still, Serbia does not recognize Kosovo as an independent state, although pressure by the EU, it de facto recognized many aspects of its independence. Serbia recognized Kosovo passports, IDs. The Serbian government is and president, they're actively negotiating with their institutions. So we could say that in reality, Serbia has de facto recognized Kosovo under Western pressure.
You see, so otherwise Serbia consider Kosovo as part of Serbia?
According to Serbian constitution, yes, Serbia does not recognize Kosovo as an independent state. I don't think this government or any future government will openly and publicly recognize or de jure recognize Kosovo, but I think they will, whoever comes to power after Alexander Vucic, will continue pursuing more or less the same policy regarding Kosovo. Not because they want to do that, maybe some politicians want, maybe some don't, but I think that's reality because Kosovo is firmly backed by the United States and the European Union. Under such circumstances, Serbia does not have much room to maneuver, but simply has uh, to do what it sees that it is the best under the current circumstances, which is anything but popular, but that's the way it is. Maybe that will change in the future, maybe it won't. I cannot predict that at this point. I think the situation for all the Balkan people here is extremely difficult, especially economically, because a lot of people are moving from their countries to the European Union to live and work there, and Kosovo is no exception. Sooner or later, who knows, maybe there will be no Serbs and Albanians living in Kosovo at all, because demographics are very bad for both Serbs and Albanians. So they're all leaving the region, and that's pretty much the situation all over the former Yugoslavia.
I see. Except for religious differences, the rest are same, you said. So, I mean, it should be not difficult to live together, if you have same language, same culture, same ethnicity. Under Yugoslavia, it was a big country, probably the biggest country in the Eastern Europe, and also powerful country in Europe, probably. But on the other hand, it can be also more, I mean, even though like that Soviet big sometimes make more difficult to develop or difficult to run the country, run the government, and difficult to develop it. And breaking different country, it's sometimes more easy to develop. I don't know what the which schedule will be better for Yugoslavia or after or broken Yugoslavia will be better. I don't know.
At the time, there were 6 republics, and now some would say 7 because they see Kosovo as a state. At the time, it was a province within Serbia, so it didn't have the same status as Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, and other Yugoslav republics. But now, whether the war was avoidable or not, from this perspective, it's difficult to tell. But as I said, I think that the country was never fully functional. Uh, the fact that people are very similar, if not the same, does not mean that they could live in the same country. Now, from my perspective and from perspective of most Serbs, I would say there's no much difference between, except religious, of course, between Serbs and other Slavic people living in Yugoslavia. But if you would ask them, they would say that we're not the same, that those languages are completely different, that cultures are different. So it's all about perception. In my view, I mean, history tells you that. So those we're talking about Slavs that came here to the Balkans in the 6th or 7th century, and at the time they were part of the same group. So there was a lot of different tribes, but they were part of the larger Slavic group. And of course, when we talk to each other, it's quite obvious that we speak essentially the same language. We can perfectly understand each other. We don't need to use a Google Translator or AI or whatever to understand each other. We can freely communicate, and we listen to more or less the same music. We are a part of the same culture, in my view. I'm talking about the Slavs living in Yugoslavia, not Slovenians, though. They're something different because they always had closer ties with Austria and with Western nations, although there are Slavs as well, but still they're different. But other ethnic groups, they are very, very similar, not including Albanians, of course, because as I said, they're not Slavs. But obviously, we couldn't live in the same country, and what's done is done. I don't think we will ever have the same country like Yugoslavia. It's possible that eventually all the former Yugoslav republics will be integrated into the European Union. I'm not sure if Serbia will join during my lifetime. I think it's a long-term process, but sooner or later, yes, I think it's inevitable. So we will again live together, but not in a country like Yugoslavia. We'll probably live in a country called Europe or European Union, something like that. So
It
whether
can
that's
be
good or bad, I don't know.
it can be also negative if you are live together and you might fight all the time and all the time civil war and the country will be always turmoil and it will be failed state. After you break into 6, 7 countries, there was almost no civil war, no turmoil, or no stability. So you get at least stability nowadays, and you can build the country, uh, each country very well, and you have more votes countrywide countrywide vote in European Union and also United Nations are breaking many countries. In case of also in Asia, Malaysia was broken into three, Brunei, Singapore, Malaysia. So they become 3 countries and now they much better developed. Singapore become much rich country and Brunei become much rich country. So if they were not broken and they stay in the same country, they might not, develop that much probably. So sometimes it can be also good for, broken country into many country in international politics, you can get more vote and more easier to develop. I guess both in terms of Balkan case, you I you might get more positive thing compared to negative through broken into 6 countries.
Well, Yugoslavia, compared to modern Serbia and compared to many other former Yugoslav republics, was a very developed country. It has a very strong industry, an industrial base, and it exported a lot of goods, not only to the east but to the west as well. So it had a very mighty military. So it was a serious nation compared to those six or some would say seven. Puppet states essentially, because they're all heavily dependent on the European Union, and they're all divided, which is a tragedy. So they're divided and now ruled by external powers, foreign powers. They have a very strong influence in all former Yugoslav republics. That was not the case during Yugoslavia, because at the time, as I explained, the country was part of the non-Allied movement, and Tito was balancing between the East and West. So it was virtually impossible for countries like Turkey or China or any other nations to try to increase their influence here. Although at the time they were not nearly as strong as they are now. But nevertheless, the country was relatively independent compared to what we have now in all former Yugoslav republics. They're now not even in a position to pursue an independent foreign policy. Especially if you're a member of the European Union, then there's no such thing as an independent foreign policy. You simply have to follow the common EU foreign policy. But I guess Croatia and Slovenia, they're okay with that. In Serbia, it would be a problem under the current circumstances because of, as I explained, the strong pro-Russian sentiment. Although I think that could change in the future, but for now it is a bit complicated. But nevertheless, from the economic perspective, Yugoslavia was stronger.
at the beginning of Cold War, at the end of World War II. I mean, there are many countries are very, I mean, better position at the time, including Russia, because Russia was that time powerful and very industrialized. Same, you said Yugoslavia also a lot of industrialized and powerful and very good economy. Also in many Asia, India, Burma, even North Korea, they are much better economy and better status than other countries at the time. But those countries all have become down, opposite to the other country present time, you know. At the time was they are better life, better economy, but now the opposite is better because you are true. According to the history, during that time, immediately the end of World War and early Cold War, Yugoslavia was very good and a lot of industrialized and powerful economy, but that is not guarantee, and you can compare to many country during that time. The same those countries were now very bad situation. They are very bad living status and poor economy. So,
Yeah,
but
it was a unique moment of history, yeah, when there was a strong division between the East and the West, and Tito used it to balance and to develop Yugoslav economy. And now thinking about it, I think that it was a relatively successful country. Who knows? It was not a fully socialist economy. It was not a capitalist country either. It was a very interesting model that we had in Yugoslavia at the time. Now it's hard to tell whether it would have been easier had been a capitalist society. Maybe in that case, it would be part of Western political and military structures already, and there would be no need for the breakup of the country. But it's all speculation, and some historians would call it alternative history, like what would happen. What you had a lot of options, so you had to choose which one would happen if you did this and if you did that. But again, it's all speculation. We cannot say for sure what will happen. What we have now is what I explained. Essentially, divided countries. They're at not a particularly good relations with each other.
even before 1991, under Yugoslavia, it's a sign of division within Yugoslavia, Kuwait, or Serbia, or different ethnic group and different religion. Even before religion, you said they don't want to live together, or they try to live separately. So if 1991 it was not broken into many countries, you will also keep going civil war till today, probably. Uh, I don't know. Do you, can you sure there won't be any civil war if the country was not broken into many pieces? Uh, who can able to manage, which will not happen any civil war or any rebellion under Yugoslavia if you still remain. But it's not easy, You will definitely, it's challenge, you will face a civil war, isn't it?
It's hard to tell. A civil war was possible because foreign powers had their interest to back the civil war. and to
Right.
back the breakup of Yugoslavia. Without that, I don't think it would have been possible because the Yugoslav People's Army did have the capacity to neutralize any attempts to separate Croatia and Slovenia. Now, why they didn't do that, it's a big question. There are some rumors suggesting that they were instrumentalized even by the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union also uh, played a role in the breakup of Yugoslavia. Actually, it was um, modern Russia rather than the Soviet Union, but still. Western powers as well, of course. So they just were not interested in that project anymore. I think Yugoslavia under Tito was a project. They needed it at the time as some kind of buffer zone in Europe between the East and West. But since the communism in the East collapsed and there was no Soviet Union anymore, there was no need for Yugoslavia any longer, and they simply wanted um, to dismantle it. And from their perspective, it made sense. Now, from the perspective of, I would say, around 70-80% of the people living in Yugoslavia, it's a tragedy what happened because I think they wanted Yugoslavia to continue to exist, even though a leadership in Croatia and Slovenia they wanted to live in their own independent nations, but still, I think it was possible to preserve Yugoslavia. Why it didn't happen is because foreign powers were not interested. So and again, as I previously mentioned, from the very beginning, from the very foundation of Yugoslavia in 1918, the Croats and Slovenians did not want to live in the same country with the Serbs. They wanted to have their own countries. Now they do. They do have their own countries. Whether they are independent or not is rather um, debatable. I think they're not because they're part of the European Union. When you become part of the EU, you simply have to give up significant parts of your sovereignty and to transfer it to Brussels. But that's
Right. Right.
another topic. So Yugoslavia ceased to exist. It collapsed. There was a bloody civil war, and as I mentioned, sooner or later, all former Soviet republics will be one way or another integrated into the European Union or some other structures dominated by the West.
I mean, if you remain as part of Yugoslavia, probably you can happen like now, Burma or Myanmar in Asia. They keep civil war till today. Every 5 years, 10 years, nationwide was civil war broken, armed struggle fighting again and again. In spite, they have agreements at the beginning of before independence. They agreed to form a countries with different ethnic groups. But Burmese case is military government, and those the people of central part of Burma, they they are intentionally violate the agreement, any agreement, international agreement, domestic agreement. That is a reason there is a civil war. If no agreement was broken, it could not have been such a turmoil. I mean, it will not be reason. No, there is no reason to be such problem.
It's not that there were agreements, there was a common constitution. So they were Croatia, Slovenia, and other republics, they were part of the Yugoslav Federation. Uh, I understand your point, and what you're saying is very interesting. Maybe it makes sense to compare Yugoslavia to Myanmar because in Europe there are no countries like that that so ethnically diverse. I think it was a unique country because in Germany, in France, and in Italy and so on, in all other European countries, you have one dominant ethnic groups, and of course there are migrants and so, but there are no three, four, five,
You
or
you
six, seven
can
major ethnic groups.
you can exclude migrant. Migrant are not the main. They are not stakeholder. They are not
Yeah, yeah, of
ethnic
course,
group.
yeah,
So at the beginning of
yes.
the country, you exclude migrant. Only those original native ethnic group
Native people, yeah.
in
So
Yugoslavia.
from that point, yeah, Yugoslavia was a unique country in Europe. There was Soviet Union, of course, which also had a lot of ethnic groups there, and that's something that does not exist in other European countries. So yeah, from that perspective, maybe it was not meant to exist in the first place. But then the question arises: why was Yugoslavia created? In the first place in 1918. Um, some historians believe that it was product of the First World War, um, and I think it is entirely possible that it's true. Um, but again, I think it just simply couldn't last for too long because it was a project after all, and when that there was no need for foreign powers to continue funding that project and to continue supporting it, it simply collapsed. But for many people living in Yugoslavia, it was a nice country. Not for all, of course. There was a lot of dissidents in Yugoslavia, anti-communist dissidents or some nationalists and so on. So for them, of course, it wasn't a very good place to live. But I would say for most people, it was. It was a very economically developed nation. It had a very strong military, and it was respected by most countries in the world. It did not have good relations with Israel, though, because Tito he sought to develop closer ties with the Arab world, not with Israel. But in he was balancing between the East and West, and at the time it was possible. Now I think it's no longer possible because the East as a political entity does not exist anymore, and there's no need for Yugoslavia anymore. But if well, it's not that there was agreement. It was Yugoslavia was founded in 1918 after Serbia won the First World War. It defeated, together with allied countries, it defeated Austrian Empire, and it captured parts of the Austrian Empire. And Slovenia and Croatia were parts of the Austrian Empire at the time. And now they they did not want to be part of that. From their perspective at the time, it was also a rotten empire, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So they were, in a way, I would say they were happy that they were part of Yugoslavia, but then they felt oppressed by the Serbs. I know it's unpopular to say this among the Serbian viewers, potential Serbian viewers, but still, that's how they felt. That's their interpretation of historical events. They did not want to be dominated by the Serbs. They wanted to be independent, to have their own countries, not to live in the same country with the Serbs. But still, Serbia absorbed parts of the former Austro-Hungarian Empire, and that's how Yugoslavia was created, and it was recognized by all countries in the world. That was in 1918. And then in 1945, the communists took over the country, and Tito was the leader of Yugoslavia for the next 35 years. And even 10 years after his death, Yugoslavia continued to exist, which means that there was a potential to save that country. But again, there were internal divisions. Economic situation was not very good in the late 1980s, and it was quite obvious that the Eastern Bloc was about to collapse. And from the Western perspective, there was no point in helping and funding Yugoslavia any longer. It was much more reasonable to simply allow it to collapse and to help those secessionist republics to separate from Yugoslavia and to create several divided states, and then they're all dependent on on Western powers. So from their perspective, it certainly makes sense, and that's why they, in my view, they helped the breakup of Yugoslavia, because they obviously knew that sooner or later all those entities would be integrated into Western structures, or at least that they would be very dependent on them for a long time. It's you spoke about some agreements. There was no agreement. There was a common constitution in Yugoslavia, and according to that constitution, it was illegal to declare independence and to separate from Yugoslavia. But still, if you're backed by the United States and the European Union, you can do whatever you want. So they recognize Slovenia's and Croatia's declarations of independence. And from a Serbian perspective, that's how the war broke out. From their perspective, they would say that Serbia invaded them, although I don't think how it's possible because they lived in the same country. But it's a long story. I don't think we have much time to elaborate on that.
It's understandable. Slovenia and Croatia, they were not willing to be under Soviet domination, so they will be always want to be separate countries. And in spite, you have constitution, right? But constitution, I don't know, Tito or any Yugoslavia leaders, Yugoslavia government violated, or they ignore.
Maybe it was possible to create a confederation because Yugoslavia was a federal state, so it would make sense to create some kind of confederation. It did not happen. I think foreign powers were not interested. They did not want Yugoslavia to continue to exist. It was maybe it was too powerful from their perspective, economically and militarily as well. Now we have several small, weak states dependent on foreign powers. It's from Brussels' perspective and from Washington's perspective, it's much better than what they had during the Cold War. But there's no Cold War anymore, and there's no need for Yugoslavia any longer. So that's the end of the story. Although now the Serbian president Aleksandar Vučić is trying to play a new Tito, because that's what some of his old voters, old elderly people, they want to see. They see him as a Tito, and they remember Yugoslav times, how great it was, and they see Vučić as a Tito, which is far from reality. He's not Tito, and Serbia is not nearly as strong as Yugoslavia was. So what he's trying to do is just to create an illusion of balancing between the East and the West. But in reality, there is no balance at all. There's just fiction and propaganda, PR.
See, so Tito was a non-aligned movement, and during non-aligned movement, they don't accept Israeli to be members of non-aligned movement. Maybe probably Tito also disagree. Tito did not want to accept Israel to be a member too, probably. And as you said, Western European and America, they are concerned about Yugoslavia. Under Yugoslavia is big country in Europe, and Yugoslavia neither part of the West, also neither part of Russia, Soviet. They concern if Yugoslavia switch and against the West, it may be dangerous. Maybe you said that made the recent breakdown of Yugoslavia into different countries, but Croats and Slovenia, probably they will be more pro-Italian or pro-Hungarian. They are very close to them, and they are close probably, I mean, religiously and also culturally. That can be also many other reasons. In Kama Bosnia, they are more Muslim. Maybe they are closer to Turkey. So everybody against Serbia, probably at the time as well. So that's internal issue is also more the reason to be, I mean, divided in Yugoslavia itself, I guess.
Yeah, but even in Bosnia, I think it was the most pro-Yugoslav republics out of all six Yugoslav republics. Bosnia was the most pro-Yugoslav. It was a true Yugoslavia, actually. It was perfectly normal in Bosnia for Orthodox Christians to marry Muslims or Muslims to marry Catholics and so on. Religion did not play an important role in Yugoslavia because it was a secular country, and especially given that it was ruled by the Communist Party, religion was um, suppressed to some extent, not like in the Soviet Union, but to some extent. So it was a very secular society. But of course, people knew their background and their tradition and so on. But in spite of that, in Bosnia at the time, they wanted to be part of Yugoslavia. But then things changed after the war in Croatia. Broke out, and it spilled over to Bosnia, and there was a bloody war in 1992 in Bosnia, and it ended in 1995. But that was not the end of the breakup of Yugoslavia, because in 1998, Kosovo Albanians, backed by Western powers, launched an uprising against the central government in Serbia, in Belgrade. And then in 1999, NATO intervened, helped them, and kicked out Serbian forces out of Kosovo. And then 9 years later, Kosovo unilaterally declared independence. So what we have now is situation in which Serbia does not recognize Kosovo. Bosnia and Herzegovina does not recognize Kosovo either, because there's a Serbian dominated entity in Bosnia, and it vetoes any potential decision to recognize Kosovo. So Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina remain the only two Yugoslav republics that don't recognize Kosovo, whereas all other former republics did recognize Kosovo, as well as the majority of the EU nations. But there are 5 countries that refuse to do that, and they support Serbia's territorial integrity. But the problem is that Serbia is forced to make concessions to Kosovo Albanians on a daily basis. So I will not be surprised if eventually Belgrade de jure recognizes Kosovo. Although I don't think that will happen in the near future, but maybe in a few decades from now or so, it, it, it will happen. I cannot guarantee, but that's my impression that it's possible. We will see. In any case, there will be no new Yugoslavia in the Balkans, and the future of this region, whether we like it or not, belongs to the European integrations. Now, the problem is that the EU does not see, at least I'm talking from a Serbian perspective, does not see Serbia as a full-fledged member in the near future. Maybe that will change in the event of a full-scale war between Russia and the European Union. Maybe then the EU will decide to allow Serbia to join the bloc, and all other European countries just to completely secure its flank and to isolate the region from Russia 100%. But again, it's a long-term process. For now, things will remain like this in a state of limbo.
I see. I mean, as long as you want to join EU as a bloc, it's almost like one country. EU, if you consider European Union as a one country, each member of European Union, including Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia, you don't have 100% your sovereignty. You have to give up sovereignty because everything will become European military. There will be no Serbian military or Croatian military. European military and European foreign policy, no more Soviet foreign policy, Croatia foreign policy, because you consider as one bloc, as a one big country. If you submit that to EU, that's predictable, and you can expect that it will happen like that. So under EU, there is no meaning. Even if you exist as Yugoslavia, there will be no power. Yugoslavia will be also no power, no military, no foreign policy, because if Yugoslavia admitted to EU, every EU member will be happen like that. So that is
Yeah, it would be integrated into European structures, into European economy.
right.
Um, at this point, there's no European army. I think it's the EU's long-term ambition to create a common European army, but it does not exist at this point. But yes, in general, Yugoslavia would lose some segments of its sovereignty for sure. As a EU member, it wouldn't be allowed to be part of non-allied movement, even though it was one of the founders of the movement. But still, it would be part of the EU, and maybe from their perspective, it would be too strong. So it's better to have 5 or 6 weak states than to have one powerful country that can veto your decisions and so on. That's, in my view, that's one of the reasons why they don't want Ukraine to join the bloc anytime soon. Because imagine they continue backing Ukraine and helping it defeat Russia and then allowing it to join the EU. Ukraine would be militarily possibly the strongest European army, and also as a country that defeated Russia, it would have significant leverage over all other EU members. So from their perspective, there's no point allowing Ukraine to join the EU under current conditions. So maybe they had the same thoughts about Yugoslavia, which is why they decided to help the secessionist movements at the time. So the country no longer exists.
Of course, if Ukraine want to be EU member, Ukraine has to give up sovereignty, some of sovereignty, certain level, like probably even it's not yet exist EU army. If there is time, if you have EU army, there will be no more Ukraine army, no more Soviet army, no more Polish army. Then you will have EU army. That's Ukraine have to accept it, and also Ukraine have to accept EU foreign policy. If as long as Ukraine want to become EU members, that is a kind of condition to become a member. But Ukraine crisis is before Ukraine become EU member, it was already conflict. So if it's not conflict, EU might be accepted Ukraine as a member. That will be no problem. But who are with a conflict now, ongoing conflict, if EU exits mean they are bringing problem in the EU. So that's the reason, I guess, that EU has difficult to make decision to accept Ukraine during ongoing conflict at the moment. Probably the end of conflict, you have much easier to accept Ukraine. Even before conflict, it is possible easier to accept Ukraine. But I don't know why Ukraine did not apply before conflict, why they are thinking about only now. You will think because he has problem, he want to become EU member.
Well, before the conflict erupted, even then, Ukraine, from the European perspective, from the EU perspective, I think was too big because it is the largest country in Europe. The first one is actually Russia, but excluding Russia is Ukraine that is the largest European country. And before the war, it also had a relatively large population. Economically, it was never that powerful, but still, for European standards, it was a big country. So I'm not sure if they were actually interested in Ukraine joining the bloc, although some politicians in Kiev were for sure. But at the time, allegedly pro-Russian Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych was trying to balance between Russia and the EU, and he initially launched the process of Ukraine gradually joining the EU and the EU's financial institutions, signing the agreement, free trade agreement with the EU. And then he tried to switch to Russia to take some loans from Moscow and so on. All that initiated Euromaidan protests. And after that, we got a war in the east of the country, sponsored by Russia. I think it was a joint operation of destabilization of Ukraine, joined a Russian Western operation, because none of them were interested in pre-Maidan, pre-war Ukraine. So just like Yugoslavia, it was a project that was allowed to exist for some time, but after that, it was supposed to be significantly updated or upgraded, however you want to put it. Now, whether Ukraine will join the EU or not is difficult to predict. I think it will not be allowed to join under the current circumstances, at least until the war is over. But after that, who knows? Maybe it will join under Serbian presidency, some Serbian EU presidency in some, I don't know, 20 years from now or so. Unless, in the meantime, a large-scale war between Europe and the European Union and Russia breaks out, which is also entirely possible, unfortunately.
I mean, you want to say EU president has a lot of power to make decision to become a member by any countries?
I see the European Union as a very powerful entity. Many analysts and even politicians tend to um, underrate the EU. I'm not one of them. I see it as a very powerful player, despite all of its weakness and the fact that it is overshadowed by the United States, of course, which is the only global superpower. But still, especially here in the Balkans, it is the EU that has a lot of influence, and also in other parts of Europe as well, and in post-Soviet space like Moldova, even in Ukraine now. And in the event of a large-scale war, I'm absolutely sure that the European Union um, has the capacity to defeat Russia, especially if Putin stays in power. With Putin and his elite in power, Russia has no chance to win under any circumstances. Um, Globally, the EU is not that strong compared to the United States and China, of course. But here in this part of the world, it is the dominant actor, especially here in the Balkans. So, yeah, I think the EU is significant
I mean,
actor. If you're talking about the president, no, it's the European Commission. It's like the EU government. So they're the ones who are pulling the strings in the EU. The president, not really. It's the Commission, the European Commission. They're making decisions. It's similar to Yugoslavia again. So they have to reach a consensus to, especially when it comes to some important decisions, which is not always easy. And there are some analysts who predict that the EU will have the same fate as Yugoslavia. Frankly, I don't think that will happen. I think they will manage to overcome their differences and to create more unified entities, more similar to federation than to this very strange entity that exists now. But yeah, centralization of the EU is inevitable in the long term. So I think countries will continue giving up the parts of their sovereignty and transferring it to Brussels and to common institutions, and then eventually there will be a potentially federal European country called the European Union. Um, For now, it's a block. It's not a state, but it's a block of nations with strong with a common foreign policy and economic policy, visa policy, and so on.
You see, so you want to say Ukraine will be the same fate with Yugoslavia? Yugoslavia, in order to become EU members, then Ukraine has to be Ukraine has to give up sovereignty, certain sovereignty to EU, and also they have to break down probably Crimea will be separately a member in EU. Also, Donetsk or Donbas, eastern part of Ukraine will be also separate independent country to become EU member, similar to Balkan, Yugoslavia has to break down several countries. So Ukraine has to break down several countries and become EU member. Same to Yugoslavia.
Well, if Ukraine wins the war, then Donbass and Crimea and all the regions will be reintegrated into Ukraine, and then as a again unified Ukraine under its 1991 borders, it will negotiate with the EU about potential accession. But whether that will happen is unclear at this point. I don't think Ukraine will have the same fate as Yugoslavia because, as I said, foreign powers were not interested in that project any longer, whereas now Western powers definitely are interested in Ukraine under its current form. I think they see Ukraine as an instrument against Russia, and I think they're using it very effectively because Ukraine has inflicted serious losses to the Russian military and to Russian infrastructure as well.
You mean Western policy make interest Ukraine to be remain as separately as of now? Western policymaker did not want to see Ukraine to be part of EU. It will be more.
Maybe in the long term, but maybe in the long term they will allow Ukraine to join. But under the current circumstances, no. They openly said that. The German chancellor the other day said that it's too early to talk about Ukraine's EU membership. So maybe after the war, but who knows how the world will look after the war? Because I don't think this war will end anytime soon, unfortunately. So for now, Ukraine will continue fighting against Russia, and the West will continue backing Ukraine's war efforts.
Of course, it is very challenges for Ukraine to win back Crimea, Donbas, all this eastern part of Ukraine.
It is, yes.
But as long as the final goal is, if Ukraine final goal is to become EU member, it doesn't matter as one Ukraine to become EU member or different Ukraine like Donbas, Crimea separately, they become EU member.
They cannot become EU members because they were.
As long as their goal is to become a member, Crimea can become separately EU member, Donbas can become separately EU. So as long as the goal is to become EU member, let them enter separately. It's also the same as you have experience in Balkan, all Bosnia, Kuwait, Serbia has same. I mean, they have to give up their certain sovereignty. So Ukraine has to also give a certain sovereignty to EU.
All the nations that aim to join the EU have to give up parts of their sovereignty,
right?
Because that's how the European Union functions. I don't think Crimea and Donbass can ever join the European Union because under right now they are part of the Russian Federation, right? Russia annexed those.